What is the deal with Goro Akechi? Is he evil? Does he hate Joker? Does he have a cluster B personality disorder? I intend to provide answers. Hi there, I'm Mimi and I like to share things that I'm passionate about. I'm a university student currently studying psychology and I have a vested interest in personality disorders specifically. I'm coming on 5 years into my degree, but I'm taking some extra time because I'm also completing my game development certificate. I do have a track record of writing diagnostics of my favorite characters. That being said, I've written a pseudo-dissertation where I am going to assess Goro Akechi through the framework of borderline personality disorder, also known as BPD, as defined by the DSM-5. This video was originally written as a fully cited essay, so if you are more interested in reading that, I will link the document in the description of this video. Alright, are we ready? Let's do this. So for some background, what is BPD? Borderline personality disorder is characterized by pervasive patterns of instability in interpersonal relationships, unstable and heightened emotions, fluctuations in self-image, and notable impulsivity. Chronic feelings of emptiness, suicidal ideation, and fear of abandonment are all traits that appear in individuals with this disorder. So the DSM-5 lays out 9 specific diagnostic criteria, and you need to hit 5 of these criteria to be diagnosed with BPD under the DSM-5. It begins by early adulthood, and though typically only diagnosed after the age of 18, youth psychiatrists are able to know if a patient displays signs of budding BPD. So out of these criteria, we have 1. Frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. 2. Patterns of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships. 3. Affective instability, which is varied and random mood swings. 4. Identity disturbance and unstable self-image or struggles with sense of self. 5. Impulsivity and self-damaging behaviors. 6. Suicidal behavior and or self-injury. 7. Chronic feelings of sadness, emptiness, or worthlessness. 8. Difficulty with anger management, i.e. through physical fighting. And 9. Stress-related paranoia, disassociation, or loss of connection with reality. Psychological models do suggest that borderline personality disorder is commonly traumagenic. So that means childhood trauma in many forms, including parental abuse and neglect, are associated with the development of borderline personality disorder. According to the American Journal of Psychiatry, 81% of individuals diagnosed with BPD have experienced abuse in childhood, which implies that a key role in the development of BPD is psychological adversity during development. So I have noticed that there is a lot of discussion on whether he would be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, or borderline personality disorder. So a lot of my motivation for sharing my thoughts is to just give my insight onto why I believe borderline personality disorder would be the most accurate diagnosis. Now that we have background on borderline personality disorder, I would like to give some background on Goro Akechi for those who might want a refresher. Hello, Mabel. Okay, so Goro Akechi is the son of an unnamed sex worker and an extremely corrupt and abusive politician named Masayoshi Shido. Shido denies Akechi's existence to the public in order to preserve his reputation and also had abandoned him as a child. He simultaneously mistreats Akechi in private, treats him as a disposable means to an end, and then uses him to murder for him. He's not a good dude. Akechi's mother did commit suicide when he was young, but he doesn't harbor any ill will towards her, but he does harbor a lot of ill will onto Shido. So following his mother's death, Akechi did not have any parental figures in his life, and he grew up in various different foster homes. He is very adamant that he has grown to be self-sufficient, but in reality, he does share that he's deeply jealous of those who have others to rely on, such as the Phantom Thieves. Akechi's childhood experiences do very much line up with the traumagenic nature of borderline personality disorder, especially considering the extent of the parental neglect, abuse, the abandonment, and loss he has experienced throughout his life. So following, I'm going to go through each individual diagnostic criterion and I'm going to determine if and how I can apply them to Goro Akechi and what we know about his character. Criterion 1 is frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. Although you will see that other criteria are definitely more directly applicable than this one, Akechi's behavior in relation to his father and the public are consistently underpinned by fears of abandonment. Hi. In Persona 5 Royal, Goro Akechi's dialogue strongly suggests that he's very fixated on earning the public's approval, and he's very concerned about people's opinions on him. He has these feelings towards Shido where he wants to become so physically and mentally capable that he becomes virtually indispensable. He really wants to keep his father's respect while harboring this intense hatred, so he has this toxic attachment he feels he needs to keep. He is quite sensitive to the connections that he does have because they are so few, and throughout his life he's never had any strong connections. As an example, when Akechi is having a breakdown in Shido's palace, he begins by manically talking about how the public is going to turn against him. He really does care about what others think of him, and it's to a detrimental extent. And to show more of his background with attachment, he shared that as a child he constantly yearned to be relied upon, and he wanted to be needed by people. And that shows in his career choices, and it shows in his personality and his motives. So overall, Criterion 1 definitely applies, and there is evidence that it would be pervasive, so I would feel comfortable applying it towards his diagnosis of BPD. Criterion 2 is patterns of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships. So Akechi's dynamic with the protagonist of Persona 5 Royal, Joker, who from now on I will refer to as Akira, it is extremely tumultuous. On Akechi's side, his feelings switch between admiration, rivalry, this deep, intense connection, and hatred. And he also does seem to exhibit examples that could be interpreted as possessiveness towards Akira, at the very least possessiveness towards Akira's thoughts on him. He's quick to shift between idealization and devaluation, which is a strong factor that indicates this criterion is present. It's easiest to analyze Akechi's relationships when looking at it through the player character's eyes, so I will majorly focus on Akechi's relationship with Akira to provide context for his behavior. However, also there is the factor that Akechi has never really had a connection like he has with Akira. That is another layer to this connection he has, and this really unstable friendship thing that they have going on. So for some specific examples on this criterion for Akechi, firstly I will discuss idealization and connection seeking. So he is very adamant in his need to prove his relation and bond with Akira, and you'll notice this through all his confidant events. He very much drives home that he finds Akira so fascinating, he finds that they connect so well, and I mean, we do know why. It's so heartbreaking that he feels that way, obviously. Maruki also gives more insight into Akechi's ideal reality. Maybe Maruki's ideal reality? I don't know. The ideal reality, through his eyes, is one where Akira and Akechi could be close. And I don't think that is far off from Akechi's ideal reality, given that he really, really values Akira and notes that he wishes that they could have met a few years earlier, which is so sad. Also to note with their relationship, Akechi wants to beat Akira in anything remotely competitive, and at the core of their relationship, they're rivals. That is something that is almost irrationally important to Akechi at times. When you, as the player, call Akechi your rival, you get extra points with him for his confident route, and he is taken aback and very happy about it because he has that bond with Akira and he clings on to that bond, which is common in borderline personality disorder, also known as having a favorite person. So yeah, he does rely on this bond very heavily. He doesn't have family or friends who truly know him, and this is evident through his breakdown when he tells Ryuji that he's jealous of the Phantom Thieves' bond. A lot of Akechi's dialogue reflects on his fixation with everyone's perception of him, including and especially Akira. So his dialogue can be interpreted as him repeatedly implying that Akira understands him better than anybody, and combined with later dialogue, these thought patterns kind of veer into a line of idealization. He's constantly implying that he and Akira have that deep connection, despite the circumstances of their relationship. Point 2 for this criterion I would like to address is splitting. Now, for context on splitting, it is a psychological defense that is commonly associated with BPD, and it shows black and white thinking, which leads to an individual being unable to find middle ground on their views on both others and themselves. Akechi very much engages in this behavior, whether he is in constant praise of Akira and he's valuing their bond very intensely, or devaluing him directly to his face. As we know, that beautiful line where he states that he hates him.
I had a feeling you'd say that. I'm going to be entirely honest with you. I hate you. Your deft handling of your unfortunate circumstances, your uniqueness, your ability to surpass me, all these irritate me.
Okay, damn. Before Akechi's death in Shido's palace, Morgana states you never really hated him, about Akira.
And you don't really hate Joker, do you? That smile before we fought. Isn't that how you really feel? Follow your true feelings.
And this line is a crucial observation because Morgana recognized that Akechi's behavior toward Akira were more of confusion, pain, and an uncomfortable attachment to their bond that he was not feeling safe in because of the context of their relationship, as opposed to this hatred that Akechi was trying to claim previously. That being said, Goro Akechi does strongly exhibit evidence of criterion 2 being pervasive, and I would feel comfortable applying it toward a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. So criterion 3 is affective instability, which is varied and random mood swings. Akechi definitely struggles with extreme and rapid emotional reactions. He ranges from collected and professional to uncontrollably upset and angry when something sets him off. He is unable to regulate his emotions consistently, and he is very prone to emotional breakdowns, which happens in Persona 5 Royal. As well, he can have intense mood swings within one conversation with somebody. To be specific in his relationship with Akira, Akechi does not maintain a consistent emotional tone towards him. So if he perceives closeness, he's very hyper-reactive to it, and he becomes almost sunny sometimes. But as said before, he praises this. It's very obvious that he likes it. But when he's upset with Akira, or even upset with himself and projecting that onto Akira, he switches from composed to very guarded and defensive very quickly. There's not much more to say about that. The proof is in the pudding. Did I say that phrase right? Who knows? Goro Akechi does strongly exhibit evidence of criterion 3 being pervasive, and it can definitely apply towards his diagnosis of BPD. Mabel wants to say hi. We're going on to criterion 4, which is identity disturbance or unstable self-image. Akechi does suffer from an extremely fragmented self-concept. So he is a confident, charismatic, and witty individual, as known by everyone who knows him on TV, in the police force. He's very charming. He's known as the Detective Prince by his fans. But on the other end, in private, he's vastly different than that, and he's knowingly vengeful, he's resentful, and he's self-hating. There are two very different sides to Goro Akechi, but he is still one whole. He seems to not know how to view himself at times, which is very common with BPD, is not understanding who you are internally. And I have some specific examples of his fractured self-concept. So he communicates that he feels he's only valuable as an asset, whether that be to his father and following his orders without question, or less directly to the public when he's working against the Phantom Thieves, as well as police, being a detective. He communicates, and Shido's puppet communicates, that he has issues with seeing himself and being seen as a puppet.
Look at yourself. You're the true puppet. You wanted to be acknowledged, didn't you? To be loved. You've been nothing but a puppet from the very beginning.
And if you read into his dual persona in the metaverse, you could see that as a metaphor for his experience with identity diffusion. Secondly, he does present as a mirror ball. He is a people pleaser. He's very skilled at adapting his behavior to fit other expectations. This is usually a defense mechanism, and Akechi is very good at doing so. He uses it if he feels he needs to be liked as a strategy to win. So being a people pleaser mirror ball is very common in individuals with BPD, and it's related to not having a stable sense of self. You just kind of reflect what you want, what you think others want. And it's more to do with putting on different faces or personas. Thirdly, I would like to note, in Persona 5 Royal, there are multiple instances where Akechi is very confident in his strengths and abilities. Like, he clearly knows that he's kind of the GOAT. But there are just as many instances, if not more, where he speaks lowly of himself, and he acts as if he's worthless. And these extreme shifts in self-image are very indicative of this criterion being applicable. Fourth, Akechi does have a disconnect with his identity. He sometimes speaks as if he doesn't understand how he feels about himself. He simultaneously believes he's above everyone else, but he's also worthless, and to quote him in Cheeto's Palace, could never be special. Further, again, he does have two personas, which is in the game mechanic sense and in the figure sense, which are his truth and his lies. So all that being said, Goro Akechi does strongly exhibit evidence of Criterion 4 being pervasive. I would feel comfortable applying this to a diagnosis. Criterion 5, we have impulsivity and self-damaging behaviors. So in BPD, this criterion is typically manifested in risky behaviors such as drug use, unsafe sex, or irresponsible spending. However, Akechi does somewhat still exhibit impulsivity in emotional context. So he is a calculated individual. He usually acts knowing what he's doing, but there are instances where he breaks down and it's extremely impulsive. So you can make an argument as to why this criterion would be applicable. For some specific examples of this risky behavior, his capacity to murder and his apathy to death and danger would probably be something to look into if you wanted to formally diagnose him. A stand-up example is his lack of hesitation to kill cognitive individuals despite knowing it induces mental shutdowns of real-world individuals. And this tendency doesn't apply only to others but also to himself, wherein once again in Cheeto's Palace, he decides to turn the gun on himself, his own cognitive double, and then lock the door, not allowing the other Phantom Thieves and Akira to fight for him. So realistically, if he was not driven by this impulsivity, he would have tried to figure out a way out of the situation, because he is smart. But he was driven by that emotional immediacy, and he accepted death within that moment, which will come back later, I will say. When it comes to Akira, Akechi does not hesitate to kill Akira. He shoots him in the head, believing it wasn't a setup, which, yeah, some people do argue that that's evidence that Akechi did not care for Akira, but all the evidence in-game shows that Akechi valued that bond. So it just shows some impulsive and harmful thinking patterns to be able to feel comfortable doing something like that. So to argue this point, one may bring up Paris and Zelta's work from 2010, where their research states the most aggressive acts committed by personality disordered patients represent impulsive rather than planned aggression. And Akechi's actions are definitely planned to a certain extent. However, I feel you can still strongly argue that a lot of his aggressive or cold behavior is used as a reactive emotional coping strategy, and it's not rational. He doesn't have like a very strong moral compass in the traditional sense, but he did murder for very desperate and personal reasons. Obviously, Akechi does have some violent tendencies. He's very open about how much he enjoys physical combat, and he has this obsession with going all out when fighting with Akira.
Of course not. But if we went any further, we'd both go beyond the point of no return, wouldn't we? In all honesty, I'd love to see just how far we can go.
He does seek these battles out, and he loves to prove himself. He loves knowing it's possible that he'll get hurt, and so will Akira. And he tells Akira that he wants to see how far they can go. Yeah, this is a more concrete example towards his enjoyment of risky behavior. And although it isn't as directly applicable as most of this other criteria. I will say that it somewhat exhibits evidence of it being pervasive in his life, and you could definitely make that argument to apply it. So tentatively apply, but in the final count of the criterion, I will probably count it out just for safety's sake. Okay, now we're on to criterion 6, which is suicidal behavior and self-injury. I don't need to spend too much time on this one because considering Akechi's death, he would immediately fit this criterion. He died by indirect suicide, by trapping himself with his cognitive double and allowing himself to die to save Akira and the Phantom Thieves. Notably, suicidality in BPD can commonly occur during moments of perceived rejection or emotional extremity, which Akechi was definitely in emotional extremity in that moment. So Akechi has repeatedly proven that he does not value his life. He doesn't feel it has meaning other than to get back at his father. I would definitely say he does exhibit evidence of criterion 6, and this should apply towards his diagnosis. Okay, now we have criterion 7. This is chronic feelings of sadness, emptiness, or worthlessness. So in my essay, I stated, while Akechi doesn't explicitly verbalize feelings of chronic emptiness, he exhibits attitudes that you could use to argue this criterion still applies. However, it would be difficult to know for sure without a proper psychiatric evaluation. And then I said, albeit, so would all of this arbitrary pseudo-dissertation. Lumphao, I don't know everything yet, I'm a student still. So that being said, this section is more so speculative. I still will stand by that, but after thinking on this segment a little more, I would say I am more confident in applying this because he does not value his life. Like, it should apply, to be honest. Sorry for the lighting shift. I had to go watch Big Brother. I forgot. So as an example of criterion 7 being applicable, Akechi rejects the possibility of living with happiness with Akira and all of their friends. Now, I will say this is also rightful because of the situation that he would be accepting this happiness, which was not a free reality, so debatable.
Remaining in this Maruki revised reality means living under his thumb forever. And I refuse to live like that. I'll be the one to choose my path.
But he cannot tolerate he's living under an identity he didn't earn, and he was vehemently against that idea from the very beginning. He knew he was dead in reality, but he was totally okay with that, and he actually actively was begging Akira to end the cognitive reality they were living in. So I would say Goro Akechi would exhibit evidence for criterion 7, but just because I do feel it is speculative, I'll leave it out of the count for the final criteria. You can apply it if you feel that my argument is valid enough. Okay, so for criterion 8, we have difficulty with anger management, and Akechi on multiple occasions does display intense and disproportionate angry outbursts. And to reference Shido's Palace once again, I love character development. Akechi does state this line.
Shut up, shut up, shut up! Teammates! Friends! To hell with that! Why am I inferior to you?
And I would say the rage here was drawn from many pieces of his psyche, such as his attachment to Akira, his perceived rejection from Akira's friendship, the group they have, feeling he doesn't belong, and then also his emotional instability. Overall, this entire palace does show Akechi's capacity for deep and violent anger, and it also shows his capacity for mood swings. It's a sudden outburst, and once again, sometimes Akechi will be praising Akira to no end, and then on other ends will have this anger. This is a common mindset for people that have especially unmanaged BP. Viewing the world and others as threats is very, very much something that Akechi does fall in line to. He wants to open up. He seems to be so close to having some sort of real connection here, but he's still unpredictable, and he has very intense emotions, and he is very scared. He's very scared. So yes, I would say that criterion 8 is pervasive and could apply towards his diagnosis of BPD. So for criterion 9, we have stress-related paranoia, disassociation, or loss of connection to reality. And simply put, Akechi does experience a psychotic break in the metaverse. This is where he is speaking irrationally, he's under extreme distress, he's uncontrollably talking about all of his warped thought patterns, and once again, if you read into the metaphor that lies in the representation of his cognitive self, he is experiencing a dissociative fragmentation of his reality when this cognitive double of him is attacking. Yusuke even comments on how warped his perception of the world is while he's having this breakdown. He mentally breaks due to the stress surrounding the situation, and he's actually deluded into thinking his ideas are realistic. To add on to this, Akechi is constantly paranoid of those around him. He makes it very clear he does not trust the Phantom Thieves, and he has this thought pattern where he isolates himself, he lashes out, and he's constantly suspicious of the people around him. He's scared of being betrayed, and those with BPD are typically hypersensitive to how others treat them, and he's quick to give and take his trust depending on what he's convinced is realistic. So to touch on the psychosis again, psychosis is not synonymous with BPD, but it is within the known system cluster. So all that put together, I would say Goro Akechi does exhibit evidence of Criterion 9 being pervasive, and I would apply it towards his diagnosis of BPD. So after analyzing Goro Akechi's behavior in Persona 5 Royal, a pattern of cognition that is consistent with borderline personality disorder is evident. He does meet at the very least 7 out of the 9 criteria from the DSM-5, if you do not include the criterion that I gave an argument for but didn't quite confirm. Even without those, he easily does fit the diagnosis of BPD, which requires 5 of 9. So Akechi does exhibit some comorbid features such as narcissistic or antisocial behaviors. However, I would determine that they're more reactive behaviors rather than central personality-based behaviors. His core personality does not line up as directly with clinical features of narcissistic personality disorder, also known as NPD, and although he does fit much of the criteria for antisocial personality disorder, he is possibly under the age of 18. And with antisocial personality disorder, you need to fit a diagnosis of conduct disorder before age 15, which Akechi would not fit. And if you don't have that, you cannot get a ASPD diagnosis. So to elaborate more on the possibility of ASPD, because I know it is quite a popular headcanon for Akechi, he would not be eligible to be formally diagnosed with it as specified, but because he does meet the diagnostic criteria, as an adult, if he is 18, there are codes that can be used for informal identification, such as a V code in the DSM-5 TR. So these codes are able to explain factors that influence a patient's mental health. But that being said, I still would feel that BPD is the most accurate diagnosis, and what a psychiatrist would probably accurately diagnose him with. Akechi is an extremely deep character who I'm a very big fan of. And I do believe he should be conceptualized in fandom and media as an individual who has had his personality warped by his early childhood. He's had a really rough upbringing, and he has some extremely deep-seated trauma. And he's really lonely. He's so alone in this world. I don't forgive him for murdering people, you can't do that. But you can see how he ended up where he is. And I think, given better circumstances, him and Akira would have had such a beautiful connection. They still do have a beautiful connection. Okay, I'm just talking. A large amount of Akechi's maladaptive behaviors were poorly integrated coping mechanisms, and he is extremely intelligent. I think in so many ways he would have benefited from so much therapy and being kept very far away from his father. Anyway, so that was my breakdown of my little studio dissertation that I have written about Goro Akechi. Once again, if you wanted to read the text version of this, the link is in the description. I also have one released game out right now. It's a short little visual novel. It's called Closure. If you were interested, go check out my itch.io. I love to make games. If you wanted to see any cosplay stuff, go check it out. I like to make animatics, but if this feels like a video that I enjoyed making, I will probably make more like this. So thanks for watching. Also, by the way, if you like hockey, I'm a big hockey guy. So follow my Twitter. I post a lot about hockey during the season over there. Alright, thank you so much. Bye!
I'm done being manipulated. Let's go back to our true reality.